So I'm Christina Wolf. I work with the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, and I staff the Range Management Advisory Committee. And I'm joined today by an esteemed panel of folks, Cole Bush, Shepherdess Land and Livestock, and is also a member of California Rural Growers Association and a variety of other institutions. Jeff Stackhouse from UC Cooperative Extension, and Tommy Winning from California Air Resources Board. And so we're going to go in that order. And I'm going to start us off today, there we go, talking about prescribed grazing in general, but also with an integration of prescribed burning. So there are a lot of challenges. I'm gonna sort of set the stage with challenges and then sort of go into what are the opportunities, where have we seen some successes, what are the constraints and limitations on this tool. Also give a brief background on the history and where are we going forward, what's the outlook on this. So in California and beyond, there are a slew of challenges for both practitioners and agency and land managers. Some of them are very similar. We've heard about insurance and liability a lot today. Permitting in CEQA is always a big one. Contracting and inflexible contract terms can always be a challenge. Wage and labor challenges. Climate change is always the overarching umbrella. Unpredictable weather patterns each year and interannual variability. Occasionally, institutional resistance to grazing, or perhaps there's some challenges with the contractor or personnel coordination of that grazing and getting the outcomes that they're both looking for. In grazing management itself, there are often short turnaround times in response to rapid changes in the environment or in weather conditions, including fire. In the case of practitioners, they own their animals and they require a constant feed source and a home base, whereas with land managers and agencies, they don't, but they also want the animals there when they want them for the reasons that they want them, and they may not be able to get them right away. So that can always be a challenge. Social perceptions and community support for these grazing practices. Occasionally, institutional buy-in. This sort of ties into institutional resistance to grazing at times. And there is also a wide variety of recommendations and guidelines and across the state where it's going to vary by region, it's going to vary by institution, it's often going to vary just by manager. And then also for practitioners, some additional challenges might be moving among small isolated parcels where we've got fragmented landscapes, and that's difficult to move animals from one place to another in these really tight spaces on occasion. And then also permanent and temporary infrastructure are always challenges. So some of the opportunities though. So we came here to talk about fuels management in the context of prescribed grazing and prescribed burn. So, sometimes we think about prescribed grazing and where are the opportunities there. You may not want to graze for whatever reason, but there are reasons that you might not have any other choice. The other tools might not be workable for you. So for prescribed fire, or if there are mechanical issues with constraints with noise, or you're right next to buildings that are a safety issue, or you cannot spray herbicides around a riparian area. So there's a variety of reasons that you might have limited tool options outside of grazing. There might be certain ecosystems where this would be a better tool to utilize for fuels management. And then you can also integrate this tool, the tool of prescribed grazing and prescribed burning, with other different tools. And our practitioners here today will talk about that a little bit more. But one thing that I have heard as well is that on occasion, practitioners will bring in their animals to graze, remove a lot of the fine fuels, and then the burning is more effective going forward. So that can be a complementary tool. And there have been demonstrated successes, although they are not cataloged in a very strategic, clear manner for us all to find, but we're going to be working on that, I think, going forward, bringing the science together so that it's accessible for all folks in California, all land managers, to find out this information and how things are working. So I'm going to credit Marshall Turbeville, Fire Chief in Northern Sonoma County Fire, for these photos. At the top left-hand corner, you're going to see where it was ungrazed. A wildfire came through. It stopped right at the fence where it had been grazed. And you can see that's sort of the background information, and the structures in the front there were saved. And some other, let's see, if I can use my laser pointer here, you probably can't see it, but this whole area was grazed and the area around it was not. And that was able to save these structures. And the winds were so high in this fire that actually this down here in the lower left corner is a panel that blew off this structure here. So the winds were really high, and yet the grazing was still effective at providing opportunity for the firefighters and emergency responders to get in there and set a barrier, set a line where they could defend from. So, as I said before though, a lot of limitations come with these tools. So the structure of the environment that we're going into, roads, what are the kind of vegetation, what are the communities like, you have the different animals and their different needs, dietary needs, ways that they graze, the ecosystems that they've been exposed to in their experience, the animals that are utilized to help manage those livestock, wildlife considerations, of course. We have recreation that occur in a lot of these areas where there is grazing, and so there can be potential issues with grazing and recreation, but those are often mitigated by signage and, thank you, signage and a variety of other public outreach and education. Policy, CEQA, we have personnel, we have other natural resources, floral resources, transportation, water infrastructure, and of course money and funding to get these things done. So what are the solutions? Well, there are a lot of grassroots efforts that are continuing on. We have coordinated partnerships right now. Cole is going to talk about some of her grassroots efforts with Grazing School of the West. So we're working in developing these coordinated partnerships across institutions because we have these segmented landscapes with multiple ownerships. And so how do you get grazing on an area that is segmented like that? So community-supported grazing programs is one of those ways. There are some efforts to streamline permitting for CEQA as well. Workforce development as well. Again, our practitioners will talk about that. And there's some legislation that's been working its way through California. Some of it has been successful. AB 297 recently passed. And we do have SB 675. It's an active bill, but is looking into helping provide more support through the state for prescribed grazing. So this family could save your family. This is an old poster from, gosh, I want to say the 60s, but I may be wrong on that, but it's an old poster. It's been around for a while. The idea of grazing is it's not new for wildfire. And the history in California, has been that it's been production focused, but we've been moving forward into a shift as to utilizing these landscapes as a working holistic landscape where we have multiple different outcomes that our practitioners and the community at large are searching for as they apply these different vegetation management tools on the ground. And our environmental understanding has also increased over time. And so we're able to streamline and have better outcomes as we move forward, as we're learning more about how to implement prescribed grazing in these landscapes for fuels and vegetation management. So where do we go from here? There are a couple of efforts for the Range Management Advisory Committee that they're trying to put together technical guides and white papers to provide information to the public and to agencies. There are continued plans for developing grazing agreements and templates for the state so folks can use them either with the state or other agencies. There are also, as I mentioned, the legislative efforts and ongoing dialogues with all of the state agencies like today, where we're talking about increasing understanding and how can we better streamline these efforts and be more effective and efficient. And again, local and regional fuel reduction, grazing projects, and ongoing workshops. Next year, the RMAC is going to be putting on a collaborated workshop with the California Licensed Foresters Association and range professionals to try to bridge the gap in forest and fuels management and range and forestry. So there are a lot of different efforts going on. And I just wanted to provide a few resources here, a very, very brief list of resources. For folks, my email is on there as well in the bottom left-hand corner. If you have any questions, feel free to please reach out. And I'm going to hand this over. First, we're going to start with Cole, and then we're going to move on to Jeff and to Tommy. We'll have questions within the panel, and then we will also open it up then to questions from the audience. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, good. You cannot see me if I go behind this, so I'm not going to do that. There's a reason why they chose a goat herder after a long day, so please pep up. There you go. Got some sugar in you, and now you're gonna get to hear a goat herder. I'm a shepherd as well, and a land steward, an entrepreneur, and an educator and advocate, not just working with animals on the land to provide an ecosystem service for fire fuels reduction, but we also focus on ecological enhancement using a prescriptive approach with grazing, with our biological masticators, our sheep and goats. All right, so I'm assuming a lot of y'all know what sheep and goats do. They graze and they browse. Prescribed grazing in our use and what we're talking about today is really first starts with what is the goal on a given landscape. From there, we're able to develop the prescription. We need to know what formula we need to use to achieve our goals in the prescription. So, like I said, biological masticators. How many two-stroke machines do you know that fall in love and have more of them? Well, these biological masticators, they're a great investment. They're my tools, they're my friends, and there are more and more of them every year. It's a good business model here. And so, again, I want to just go back to the goals. What is a successful project, right? It might be different to an operator versus a client versus a public. And that's where success can only happen when there's a unified goal. Again, the prescriptive approach is different than, say, your traditional grazing for a livestock producer whose revenue stream may be fiber or protein. My main driver in my business, Shepherdess Land and Livestock, based out of the Ojai Valley in Ventura, our main driver is prescribed grazing as a service. I am a contractor almost more than I am an agrarian. Fortunately, I have the ability to do both, which I love, but there are big differences in how we operate because we are a service provider. You are our clients, our public are our clients, and we have to love our animals all the while. So you can put, the two-stroke away, but you can't put the sheep and goat away. More and more folks are seeing prescribed grazing as a ecologically beneficial or climate-smart way to go about fire fuels reduction. There are a lot of fantastic benefits, but again, it really depends on the prescription and the implementation of the prescription. But some of the other cool things that are byproducts or achievable goals with grazing are things like invasive species management. 1 minute remaining, I'm going quicker. So I love this one. That's Magic Mountain. That's about 600 sheep on the side of that hill underneath Magic Mountain. Folks like us because air quality, I know we're talking burns, but you're our air quality guy, so I'll let you talk about that one. Sheep and goats don't do the same thing as plumes of smoke. Noise pollution, who wants to hear weed whippers? Steep slopes, these animals can go in places that are unsafe for humans or machines to do the work. And soil compaction as well. These hooved animals have lesser of an impact than some of our big machine options that we have. Again, the RX, what's the prescription? Well, these are the components of what an operator uses to carry out a successful project, again, based off of our goal. The species and breed, goat versus sheep. Sheep are grazers, goats are browsers. They have different preferences. Some operators only use sheep, some goats. I use mixed species because I want to kind of decide my formula of how many sheep to goats based off of what are the fuels. Is it an understory? Are we trying to lift a ladder under tree stands, shrubs, or do we got a lot of flashy fuels, annual grasses? I choose the right animal for the job. The number of animals, the density of animals, what does that mean, density? We're able to use, I'm getting a call, I don't know if that's got to get off stage. We're able to control that density by our temporary electric fences. You get higher impact when you have more animals. That's the red, so you guys, you have to make sure you ask me the right questions. Duration, how long are we there, and what time of year? You're going to get different outcomes based off of the time of year. Real quick, I do want to shout out to a project we did on reduction of laurel sumac. Early in the year, they love the stuff. Later in the year, they like it less. So understanding what time of year these targeted species we're trying to graze, it's really important to know when browsing and grazing can actually work for our jobs. Very steep slope, sheep and goats, not guys with weed whippers. 1 acre, 400 animals, 45-degree slope, vegetation, primarily annual grass. Beautiful, beautiful fuel break right there. Homes up in the left-hand corner. This is the crazy terrain that we graze in. I'm proud of this. My shepherds, animals, dogs. In some areas, we can only use just herding dogs to get through some of our projects. So we take the animals out on grazing circuits. That kind of can speak for itself. Those guys are cool. They stand on each other, help knock it down so their buddies can eat it. It's great. That's how fast they work. It's efficient. It's pretty. Evaluation of your site. Please ask more questions about this. Very important. Cost structure. You're going to definitely ask some questions. Everyone's pulling up their phone. Maybe we can make sure that y'all get this, but there's several cost structures that are what you should be ready for, and how an operator might quote, or how you might write your RFP. Annual, this is always changing. Cost of everything is going up. So $800 to $1,200 an acre is variable, but we can talk a little bit more about that because someone's gonna ask me a question about it. And you need to find the right contractor. Vet your contractors, not one size fits all. Goat grazer, great, let's get the goats out here. It's really important to select the right grazer. And then in conclusion, sheep and goats are great. It is one option in our toolbox, and we can pair prescribed grazing with other methods to achieve our goals in a efficient, effective, and cost-effective in many cases if we know how to use our tools. So my hope is that this is a beginning to more folks in this space to understand the appropriate usage and how prescribed grazing can be utilized in post or pre-prescribed burn projects. Apologies on running over. She started it. All right. Yeah, go ahead. Which one?
Left hand. You got the clicker.
I got the clicker. I got that.
That's the one, yeah. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Stackhouse. I work for University of California Cooperative Extension up on the North Coast out of Humboldt County. And for those of you that don't know what Cooperative Extension is, there's been a few of us that have gotten up and talked, but the map on the left, kind of the dots on there show all of the places where Cooperative Extension exists in the state of California. But essentially, we are charged with taking information from the ivory towers of the institutions and working with private landowners across the state and agriculturalists in all different fields. My field happens to be cows. So I am the livestock and natural resources advisor for the North Coast. My clientele are all private practitioners, so this is gonna have a very private kind of viewpoint in my talk. And then one of the other things that has happened in the last few years with my job is that myself and a colleague who is a fire advisor, you'd think she may be here talking instead of me, but at any rate, we brought this prescribed burn association model back to the state of California. It's an interesting story. It started here as in the form of range improvement associations. It kind of dwindled out and went and lived in Florida and in the Midwest for, 50 years or so. And then now it's starting to snowball back in California. And that's the map on the right here is a little outdated, but essentially those are the PBAs that are starting to crop up across the state. And that's kind of how I think I landed here was I'm doing a lot of prescribed fire work, and I'm doing a lot of cow stuff up on the North Coast. And a lot of the work that I do is really just based around vegetation management. And And one of the things that I think is important for land managers and landowners specifically to think about is, what do you not want your property to look like? Like, what do you not want it to look like? Because some people really think that the picture on the right is what they want, and I'm not going to disagree with them as the land stewards of their properties. For me, I dislike the picture on the left just as much as I dislike the picture on the right. So the picture on the left, as a range ecologist, woody encroachment is one of the biggest problems I think that we have in our natural ecosystems in the state of California. So when I see these beautiful, pristine, coastal rangelands getting swallowed up by fir trees, it makes my skin crawl a little bit. And but it happens, and it happens continuously and consistently across the state. And I really think that there's a large amount of landowner apathy when it comes to woody encroachment, because it happens relatively slowly and over time. So this is a picture of an attempt to beat back some of that woody encroachment on some rangelands in the coast. This is really close to the Cape of Mendocino. And this is a burn that we did that we were very proud of. And I put some plots in there, and this is a cattle ranch. So the main objective of this burn was to increase acres for grazing. And what was interesting is, it was primarily Baccharis, coyote brush was the target species, and we know that it resprouts, but at what rate does it resprout? And so I just did a little really basic trial where we counted them and monitored them and watched them. And essentially 50% of them die with one treatment. Like one good hot burn, you're gonna kill half the plants. I can really talk to you all day about that because I find it fascinating as to like the mosaic of how they resprout and don't resprout. But essentially with grazing, then we can come back in, and the ones that do resprout, the livestock and the deer actually really seem to prefer these resprouts, and they'll hammer them. And it's turning out that we can go from 50% to about 25% survival on those plants because they can just get worn down by the livestock, especially on the flatter slopes where the livestock get bored and tend to congregate. So I guess the point of that was even in a very successful burn, we still know that we're gonna have to come back, and everybody talks about return intervals in the world of fire, and I think that the return interval really just needs to be what the landowner wants it to be, and to think about, what are the objectives, and what do we need to do in terms of return intervals to meet our objectives. So if it's basket weaving and we want, straight product to, straight stems to make baskets out of, that's gonna have a different return interval than we want the ground to be open enough for cows to walk through it, right? So I think it's important because these prescribed fire projects aren't free. Even with the prescribed burn association, where it's neighbors helping neighbors and all of the labor is free, you're still, throwing some stipends to volunteer fire departments. It still takes a lot of time to prep and plan and everything else. So with the other piece of the story is that we were asked as a group to kind of talk about prescriptions. And Cole got into that a little bit, like, what is your RX? What is your prescription? And in this example, if your prescription with grazing is to absolutely stop wildfire in its tracks, we can do it. We can do it with cows. And this was a trial that we did up and down the state. And as you can see, I don't know how obvious it is, but there's basically different levels of prescription of where we graze to different amounts. I actually used a weed eater and crawled around my hands and knees to do it. But you can see behind the gal with the red backpack that we can graze to levels to where fire will not continue and will not persist. Thank you. So these are the different levels that we grazed, and at different levels we can make it stop essentially. Thanks for adding these slides. I think that was it. I'm out of time anyway. The last piece was, so that kind of just touched on grazing prescriptions a little bit in terms of pounds per acre, but that's, for the flashy fuels. And then when you get into the prescribed fire scene, this is something that I really encourage anyone that's a practitioner in the field. And it's something that I have just now started doing in like the last 12 months. But I really, really encourage folks, and I think this gets a little bit to what we heard from Australia, is to start thinking about fire prescriptions and resource requirements based on like a maybe not a 12-month cycle, but at least, a good 8-month cycle. So I'm writing prescriptions now where I have like basically the hot prescription and the resource requirements, a medium, if you will, and a low prescription. So that way, as we have windows come and go, it maximizes the amount of work that we can get done. And if you can get out there with one person on a cold day, it's great. If you can get out there with 100 people and do the whole project in one day, on a hot day, that's great too. But CAWFire has been very open to issuing me permits in this fashion. So I'm getting my LE 7s and 8s with these prescriptions in my burn plans. And there's a lot of reasons to do it, but like liability coverage is one of them, because if you have a permit and you stay within the permit and the burn plan, it shows due diligence. So a lot of reasons to go there, but just on the prescription front, I really recommend this hot, medium, and cold for anyone that's doing it in the field.
All right, my name is Tommy Winning. I'm the air quality meteorologist for the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District. First of all, thanks for including me on this panel. It's been great to learn a little bit about what everyone does, kind of open the options a little bit as we go forward in terms of this type of activity. Before I get into my subject, just like to take a second to thank the people that put on this conference. It's clearly it's been well planned. The talks have been interesting, and I'm sure you've all worked incredibly hard behind the scenes that most of us don't even realize. So, well done, everybody. This has been a great day, and I look forward to tomorrow as well. So, in terms of the Air Pollution Control District, we kind of come at it from a different angle, right? So. Touching on a little bit of what Cole said is, what do you define as success? Our success is mitigating the impacts or the adverse effects of smoke on sensitive receptors, right? So we're talking population areas whether it's housing developments, whether it's senior citizen centers, whether it's schools or anything like that. We fully support any types of prescriptive burning. We primarily deal with agricultural burning in Ventura County for the most part. However, prescribed burning in terms of wildfire mitigation or vegetation management is something that we're going to continue to see more and more of as these things need to be taken care of. So these types of things, we operate under the authority, I suppose, of the California Health and Safety Code, and it's not a matter of the Air District running anything. We want to cooperate in order to make sure that it happens efficiently and that it impacts as few number of people as possible, right? So Air District responsibilities when it comes to things of this nature, essentially we're in charge of the real-time air quality monitoring, okay? So we have to adhere to state and federal standards when it comes to smoke management, right? We're in charge of the air quality forecasting and the burn forecasting, whether it's on a daily basis for the agricultural burn program or for whether it's a special project in terms of a prescribed burn. And public health messaging, poor air quality conditions, things of that nature. So and that's not just limited to any sort of burning, that is on a day-to-day basis, right? In terms of smoke management, we don't issue the burn permits, so it's a little incorrectly written, but we are included in the burn permit process. However, typically when we're talking about agricultural burns, it's the county fire department that actually issues the burns. But we work in quite close proximity with them. There's a lot of cooperation and open communication with the county fire in terms of any sort of burning that goes on in Ventura County. So if you're dealing with one of us, you're dealing with both of us. So in any event, we coordinate and we track the prescribed burn projects, and we also have to deal with complaint response. So those are just some of the facets in terms of the Air District of our responsibilities. In terms of agricultural burning, it's a relatively simple process. Those folks who have agricultural operations, whether it's any sort of waste from trimming or turning over an entire field or even taking care of your wind lines. It's essentially a no fee required to obtain a burn permit. It's one sheet of paper. You contact the local county fire department and they come out and inspect your piles. Right, and it's basic information, applicant names and things of that nature, material to be burned, how much, right, whether it's a pile or you have calculated it in tons. There's a couple little cheat sheets. One's on the back of the physical permit that you can calculate that kind of back of the envelope style. And then any other sort of additional fire department requirements, right? So mostly it's a 1 pile per hour type of thing, and that's basically to kind of keep any sort of emissions some sort of a steady and controlled. And so in cases of big projects, it does take a little bit longer than a lot of people would like. But if we can minimize the amount of smoke that's put into the air, because a lot of these places aren't out in the middle of nowhere. They have locations that are sensitive to these types of things. We keep that at a minimum, then we can continue to have more days that people are allowed to take care of these kinds of things. In terms of prescribed burning, it's an automated process. We use the prescribed fire information reporting system, and that goes for any type of prescribed fire, right? Prevention of high-intensity wildland fires and things like that, watershed management. But essentially, the things that we're most concerned about, again, are the locations of your smoke-sensitive areas, about public contact methods, and other alternatives to burning, right? And so any types of those parts are the most important because we don't want burning to be the only option, but it definitely is an option. However, if there's a possibility to take care of it in other ways, we're absolutely for that as well. So it's not a matter of being for or against it. We're absolutely for supporting it, but we're also for supporting other methods. And quite honestly, working together to figure out which method is the best in order to take care of your specific needs. So that's all I got. I only have a couple of slides. In terms of the Air District, you can always contact us. We have an automated burn line if you're interested in what type of agricultural burn day it is. We have a manned line that you can call anytime and somebody will answer. It's me, I'll answer. And then you can have, if you have any questions or if you want to activate a permit, you can catch us on Twitter. You can go to our website, and we have all of the documentations in terms of like the air quality forecast and burn status, or the regulations in terms of Ventura County's smoke management plan, Rule 56 on open burning, Title 17, the California Health and Safety Code. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tommy, and Cole, and Jeff. So I'm going to start with you, actually, Tommy, but I think this is going to apply to all of you. When it comes to emissions and climate change, clearly hot topic, pun intended, in California. How does this fit into into the big picture for climate change and emissions when it comes to prescribed grazing and prescribed burning? Are these really tools that we should be utilizing considering our concerns over emissions in California? And are there other tools that might be better suited?
No, I think in terms of like you speaking like burning versus other methods in that regard, I think I suppose there's a use for each of the methods themselves, right? And so if it's a matter of something that can be taken care of in other methods, it's with other practices, then it's definitely something to look into. But in terms of any sort of the emission inventory and things of that nature, I think it's probably more of a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. When it comes to choosing the right tool, how do prescribed burning and grazing fit together? Do they fit together? And how do you make the decision about what tool to use when and where?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. I really like it when they're paired 100% of the time, to be honest. So sometimes, it depends on your objectives, of course. So sometimes if your objectives, for example, are my personal woody encroachment vendetta, right? Where I want to kill every tree that's going into a prairie. Like in that case, we need to kind of keep the livestock out to try to get that flashy fuel base to generate enough heat to consume those bigger trees, especially if they have any size to them at all. And then conversely, like the example I had with the coyote brush, you can have a really nice hot fire and immediately put those animals in there afterwards. Not immediately, but within a couple months. And as soon as that stuff greens up, you can really do a lot of good work with not too many animals or a ton of animals, depending on, again, what your operation looks like. But those animals can do excellent maintenance. So in that picture that I showed of kind of that bigger landscape burn that we did, in the areas where we had cattle grazing, and these are cows, they're not supposed to browse, right? In the areas we had cattle grazing, those coyote brush plants are still, this is 5 or 6 years later, they're still only 6 to 7 inches tall. And the cattle will graze them down every single summer when the rest of the grass dries up. And then just on the other side of the fence, without grazing, the coyote brush is already over my head. And I'm not that tall, but there's 6-foot plants that have come back pretty aggressively. So I think that pairing them always makes sense. Another example would be like in a flashier fuel type, we have some Medusa head issues on the North Coast. For us, it's a really bad weed. And in those circumstances, I love hammering them with livestock before we burn, because Medusa head has silica in it, so the cattle can't digest it. So the only grasses that the cattle will consume in those pastures are the palatable, more favorable, and native grasses, so that they'll eat them down, keep them green later into the summer. The bad grasses stay high, they dry out, and they're the only thing left to burn. So then you have grasses that have been grazed, can still go to seed, and then fill in and compete with your Medusa head plants. So I see a lot of fire people always telling livestock people, get your cows out, we want to burn, get your cows out, we want to burn. And frankly, it's really bad advice in a lot of cases.
I like this conversation so much. You have to know your plant species. You have to know what ecology you're working in. And a lot of our California ecology, let's be real, is a fire ecology, adapted with fire. Our grasslands adapted with ungulates. So recognizing what was the evolution of the species that we're managing is really important. And getting specific to what are we managing for? Is it Medusa head? Is it star thistle? When do the seeds disperse? Those types of questions we have to be asking. I think, again, I would agree with you that the combo punch of grazing and prescribed burn's great, because there are limitations of both. There are limitations of both. And also grazing prior to burning can actually perhaps create a safer condition for the burn, because it lessens the how much flashy fuel would, how much flashy fuel might be there. So it could be a good prep. One last thing on when to know what to do what. I think, again, you really have to know what kind of landscape you're working in, and you have to know really what the sheep and goat can do. And they're not going to eat a branch that is the size of my wrist. How many hour fuels are we working with? So continuing to refine on what they will do and what they won't do is really important. And you gotta talk to your operators, and we love to talk to you. Not that long, but we'll answer questions.
Yeah, I guess I'll just follow up with that. And I both prescribed fire and livestock are imperfect tools. Like going into a contract with a fire group or a fire agency or a grazing contractor, you need to know that it's not going to look perfect when you walk away. It just isn't. We have some tools that I would say are maybe more perfect or more prescriptive, and that we haven't talked about herbicide at all at this conference. But if you want something to look perfect, mechanical treatment and herbicide are kind of your options. But generally speaking, most groups are trying to move away from those more fossil fuels, heavy-handed herbicide treatments, I would say, in most cases across the state, and the options are less perfect. But I think that that's just a reality, and it's something that we need to go into with these contracts and with these projects. If we're gonna walk away from traditional herbicide treatments, we need to have more tolerance for things not looking exactly perfect at the end of the day.
So strategically combining the right tools at the right place at the right time for the intended outcome. Sounds like starting off with that goal in mind is going to be really important. I wanted to open this up to the audience for any questions. Do we have any questions in the audience? Right behind you.
I'll take both. I could beatbox in the one. Actually, my question is for Tommy regarding any thoughts or opinions on the EPA's rule change to particulate matters and how that affects the ability of some of these tools to be used in your district?
Well, the short answer is yes, but at the same time, it is rules that we have to adhere to, so it's just a matter of finding ways that people can still achieve their objectives and follow the rules that are handed down to us, I suppose is the best way to put it. So in that regard, it is the rules, and so it's our job to use the practices that we know and find people that are very good at the practices that they know in order to achieve that goal, because at the end of the day, that's all, if you don't keep searching or striving for improvement in terms of the air quality, then you're never going to get truly to where you want to be, right?
I'm on next. Hello, Lara Papiak, California Fire Safe Council. Legislation with goat, sheep herding. How can we help? How can we advocate? How can we come to some legislative agreement that helps this rather than hurts it?
We have a panel discussion after this that's going to be 4 hours long. So just real brief, because that's a big question. Thank you for it. Right now, the California Department of Labor has no idea how to understand what a job of a 24/7 sheep herder is. And so there is a lot of contention right now on what to do with the sheep herders and how to pay them. If we did time and a half plus all of the other things, we would be looking at a job that's $14,000 plus a month to be a sheep or goat herder, particularly. That's not feasible. So what we're trying to understand is how do we build our programs to work with having viable vocations? And how do we redesign how we can use this approach, support this approach, but that we have to recognize that we need to be training people here. Most of the sheep herders and large outfits are H-2A workers on special work visas. We need to create opportunities for education and training for a new workforce in this. Not just being a sheep herder, but a fire ecologist, to understand all of ecosystem processes. And I think that there's a future in which we'll have more education and training, and hopefully in our fire sector, we could have folks on staff who understand the intricacies of prescribed grazing and maybe get some shepherding training. So any of you in the fire field want to come to my shepherd's boot camp, let me know.